Share the love. And so the descendants of the people, as I mentioned, spoke more than one language. So I'm only guessing that the people who used to live here spoke more than one language. So whatever their names were in the various different languages, we have no idea. But the Wetherill family, they're the ones credited with revealing these places to the greater world, though they were not the first non-native people to see cliff dwellings and that. There is written evidence of someone back in the 1840s who saw cliff dwellings. There is also evidence of a photographer who took pictures of cliff dwellings in the 1870s, I believe 1876. And when archaeologists went through these structures, they did notice where people carved their names into the stones and wrote the dates, which predates when the Wetherills came here in 1888. So other people, other non-natives came here, but the Wetherills are credited with revealing, because once the Wetherills came here, there were newspaper articles and magazine articles written about these dwellings. And remember, young people, that back in the 1880s, mass media was newspapers and was magazines and that. Would you like to hear the story how the so-called the Wetherills discovered this place?
Yes.
Well, it was 1888. It was December, and there were two cowboys. The Wetherills, like I said, were ranchers out of Mancos. At the time, this was Ute tribal land, and they had permission to run their cattle on this land. And so the story goes that in December, and like I said, there were two cowboys, so that means there were two stories. Was it December 3rd, or was it December 17th? Were they out looking for some lost cattle, or were they just out riding around? They both agreed it was snowing that day. And so could you imagine being one of those cowboys and riding up to the edge somewhere and looking over and voila. But of course, Cliff Palace didn't look like this. That's why I encouraged everyone to look at that image up there to see what Cliff Palace looked like 100 years ago. And so, as I said, magazine and newspaper articles were written. The word spread across the ocean, and in 1890, a gentleman came here. He was a mountain climber, Mr. Chapin, and he came with the Wetherills and visited the cliff dwellings here at Mesa Verde. And in 1891, the year that my grandfather was born, one of the people who raised me, a gentleman from Sweden came here and visited this location. By the way, is there anyone here who can speak Swedish? Because I cannot pronounce his last name. Well, Mr. Gustav Norden something or other. He came here in 1891. He was university educated. He was a trained scientist, but he was not an archaeologist. But he was the first person to look and describe these cliff dwellings in a scientific manner, whether through the written word, whether through illustrations, or through photography. And in the following year, in 1892, he wrote a book called The Cliff Dwellers of Mesa Verde. And I believe that book is for sale in our bookstore. And I'm guessing that if you were to be hired here at Mesa Verde as an archaeologist, that might be one of the first resources you would be given, because it is still a valuable resource. Are there any questions?
So plastering is probably a poor term, but up there underneath the cliff, some's not plastered. I don't know how the devil they finished off what they did that high, but is that recent add that loose, that, or why is that the way it is?
Why is that the way it is? If you would ask an archaeologist, they would probably look at it and go, I don't know. Because that's what archaeologists told us. Now, during my first season here in training, we had a Pueblo person with us, and we asked him, what do you think? Why do you think it's like that as compared to where all the other ones are finely mortared and that? And he looked at it, and he paused for a moment, and then he said, children got to start somewhere.
Was that a storage for like food, or was that a living quarter?
That was storage. It is 5 feet tall back there.
Oh.
but it was primarily storage. And by the way, young people, had you lived here back in the 1200s, you never would have gone to school one day in your whole entire life.
They're
But-
lucky.
But as some adults would have said, life was schooling. And so girls, you would go off with your mother, your sisters, your aunts, your grandmothers and do and work and learn about the things that they do. And boys, you would go off with your father, your uncle, your grandfather, and you would go and work with them and learn the skills that you need to be an adult working with them. So though you may not have gone to school, you would have been educated. Look at these structures, young people. Do you think uneducated people built these structures?
No.
I agree.
Two questions. First, the way in and the way we went out, is that possibly the way they could have come in and out?
Probably not.
Probably not, okay. And the other question is, so many boulders, building things. Is there any evidence of areas where they took those from?
No, they worked with their environment. They did not choose to change it.
But I mean, they picked up this rock from somewhere. Is there any evidence that this is where they took a bunch of them from or anything like that?
Well, they shaped the sandstone into bricks. So when you drive by alcoves where nobody lives, you'll notice that there's a bunch of stuff in there. That's your building material right there. They probably also quarried rocks from other places. It is also believed by archaeologists that they dismantled a number of the structures that were up on top and brought those materials down here. We do need to keep in mind that the people who built and lived here lived up on top of the mesas for hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of years. And by the way, what was their main occupation?
Agriculture.
Farming, that is correct. And where did they primarily farm? Up on top of the mesa. And so to me, they must have been very good farmers, because you can't build things like this if you don't have enough food to feed your family and your community in the first place. Did you have a question, sir?
I did. When I was here almost 20 years ago, it was considered Anasazi ruins, and now you don't even hear the term Anasazi.
That is correct. The word Anasazi comes from the Dene language, the language that the Navajos speak. And to the Pueblo people, the descendants of the people who live here, to them, the word Anasazi means ancient enemy. And so they have asked that we choose not to call their grandmothers enemies. And so that's why we no longer use the term Anasazi, but Ancestral Pueblo, or as I choose, just Pueblo. By the way, where does the word Pueblo come from? What language?
Spanish.
Spanish, that is correct. So that was a name placed on the people when the Spaniards came up from Mexico in the 1500s. The names for themselves are not Pueblo, but they have their own names. As a matter of fact, there's over 20 Pueblo communities that are associated with this national park, and they have their own different names. Yes, ma'am.
How many families were estimated to live here at one time?
How many people may have lived here at Cliff Palace? Well, I want to make you guess. I want to give you some information first. When the archaeologists went through here, they found 150 rooms, 75 open spaces, 21 kivas, and 2 kiva-like features. So based on that information, how many people do you think may have lived here back in the 1200s? And just say some numbers. 300? How many?
1,000.
1,000? Any other guesses?
1,200.
100?
623.
623? Who said 100?
323 and a half.
Do you like to read, sir? Did you read that number? I applaud you, because as a former librarian, I like people who like to read. And so he is correct. Archaeologists believe that maybe 100 to 120 people may have lived here, and they base that information on the fact that when the archaeologists went through here, they found only 25 hearths. And what is a hearth?
Fireplace.
It's a fireplace, but it's more than just a fireplace. What else?
A gathering center.
It's like an oven. What else?
Gathering center for the family.
Gathering center for the family. Or as one little girl said, it was the heart of the home. And so based on that fact, archaeologists believe only 100 to 120 people may have lived here. So archaeologists really have no idea what Cliff Palace may have been used for. One young gentleman suggested a condo. Before I get to your question, sir, at the very end, I have a job for you. As soon as you start to hear voices at the bottom of the ladder, will you please let me know? As soon as he hears voices down there, that means the next tour is on the way, and we got to scoot out of here right away so that they can have this place to sit in that. So, your question, sir?
Obviously, a lot of people live here over recent years. Any traces of those people?
Yes.
I don't mean that. I mean human remains.
Oh, yeah, the archaeologists found many skeletal remains.
Any reason that they were in a certain place?
They were not in a certain place. They did not build cemeteries or have cemeteries. The people were buried in just various different locations.
They lived about how long? Age-wise?
That's kind of hard to say. Many people could live up to 50 years old or older, but it was very difficult to live to be 5 years old. So many young people died before they were 5. If you lived past 5, you could probably live to 50 or older, unless you were a woman, because many women died in childbirth. So if you're a woman and can live past childbirth, then you can live up into your 40s and 50s and even older in that. You had a question?
Actually, have you guys ever found any like bones of whoever lived here and searched up like to see what were their names? Or no?
Well, we did find skeletal remains, but to find their names and stuff, that would be very difficult to find out. That information wouldn't last in rocks or things like that, and that's really all archaeology can tell.
Another question. So, do you work with other places in America?
Do I work in other National Park Service sites? Is that your question?
Or like if you work with any scientists and that to find that what like things used to be called in that?
I do work with archaeologists and scientists here. I don't work directly with them, but it's very easy for me to email them or call them or see them around and ask them questions and that. And they do come and train us too. So, any other questions?
Is there any evidence as to why they moved from up there to down here?
There's many guesses and speculations. Had you come here 100 years ago, the archaeologists who got this place ready for visitation would have said for defensive purposes. But archaeologists don't really perceive it that way anymore because they really didn't find any skeletal remains, with lack of a better way of putting it, with war wounds. So that doesn't really seem to be it. There could be a whole bunch of reasons, but to me, my guess is that the people were farmers, and whatever motivated them was farming. That was the most important thing. We have visitors, we got to scoot.